and welcome everyone. We are live. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good night if you're watching us somewhere where it's currently around going to bedtime. My name is Alexa Live, and you are at the Testcontainers live show with our guest today, the one and only Lukas Eder. Hi, Lucas. How are you doing?
I like.
Let me let me mute all. I need to mute all the YouTube videos because they are being annoying. Um,
You're watching other videos in parallel.
no, no. This is us. This is us being live streamed on YouTube, um, and it's all working out. So today is a very interesting day. We're gonna talk about a number of things. We're gonna talk about SQL, SQL, the fourth generation programming language, which trumps quite a bit of others. We're going to talk about databases and everything. Lucas, here, if I would need to introduce you to the larger community, Lucas is the Java champion. Lucas is the creator of the jOOQ libraries, a brilliant engineer, an entrepreneur, an author, and our guest today. So I'm very happy that you are here. We are hearing echo. I need to. Let me see. Let me just double check. Do you think echo could be from your side?
I don't think so. I'm
Me
using the
neither.
headphones now.
Me neither. Double check that there are no two versions of two like YouTube videos open and running. Yeah, I think it could be
Better
just.
now.
I don't know. That was someone, our viewer said that they are hearing some echo. It shouldn't be there. So yeah, so we'll try to figure it out. Right. So if you are, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Simon, for confirming that there is no echo. I think, Siva, I think you're just having two YouTube tabs open and they are a little bit out of sync. It could happen. Right. So if you're watching this not live, if you're watching a recording, which you absolutely should do, first send it to your friends, to your colleagues, because they can enjoy this as well. And second, if you want to ask any questions to Lucas, you can find him. His preferred social network is Twitter, and he goes by at Lukas Eder. Very simple, first name, last name. You can ask him any questions about any of the topics, and I'm sure he'd be happy to respond to you. So, I've known you, Lucas, for quite some time, and back when we saw each other a little bit more often, you were still a little bit an engineer. Do you still write code?
Yes, of course.
Oh,
You think I was? I'm more than ever, I guess.
more than ever. What? A quick random question. What ID do you use?
I'm mostly using Eclipse. Since the old days, I've never changed. Using
Okay.
occasionally IntelliJ for Kotlin and Scala stuff, of course.
Okay. But you were still mostly coding in Java.
Yeah.
Did you feel any pressure at any point of time to learn and maybe migrate to other languages?
No, I don't think so. Java has a huge market, which isn't going away. I mean, right now it's developing at a very decent speed. With a lot of great features, both in the Java language and on the JVM as well. So I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yes. Do you have your favorite feature coming up in the like either from the recent Java releases or the upcoming like Java 21?
Sealed types are quite nice for jOOQ itself. I'm not getting to use them myself, but for the users of jOOQ, it's gonna be a treat in a few releases. So it's not happening right now, but soon. And also, I'm very much looking forward to Valhalla, of course. I'm hoping that this can drastically reduce the memory overhead of jOOQ. for users, as the data structures that are going to be fetched from the database can be more primitive, right? So right now everything is boxed, of course, like in any generic typed API, but in the future this could be better. And I'm also very excited about Loom, seeing what that's going to do to the reactive world, which I very much regret, right? So jOOQ supports R2DBC, which is interesting for jOOQ and for jOOQ users, but I'm hoping that this is a very temporary thing that will go away again. The whole reactive API style, hoping that Loom covers maybe about 80% of those use cases, so people can go back to the original API design and forget about those fluxes and monos and whatever.
Right. For uninitiated, right? jOOQ is what the website says. It's the easiest way to write SQL in Java, right? But can you maybe explain in 1 2 sentences before we dive into like more
Sure.
detailed, like what is it?
So jOOQ has two parts. The first part is a code generator that generates Java code from your database schema. So for every table and every column, you have a Java object that has added type safety to your SQL queries in your Java code. And the second part is a DSL that is written entirely in Java that mimics the SQL language. So you have a DSL that looks like SQL and it feels like SQL and it runs SQL queries behind the scenes based on that static meta model that you generated before. So in the end, it's an internal domain specific language modeling SQL in Java to increase your type safety and your quality of your code, and giving you tons of mapping features and whatnot.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, but at its heart, it's a library.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Absolutely.
and that's why you don't get to use the cool and new Java features, because you have to
Yeah,
do the
jOOQ still
backward
supports Java
compatibility.
8.
Java is 8 your base level?
Yeah, for commercial users, yes. For open source users, it's 17 now. But internally, I still don't get to use Java 17 features.
Right. Nice. Oh, so there is a commercial offering of jOOQ as well.
Yes, yes.
Do
Absolutely.
you can you elaborate? Like what exactly is? How
So
do you build a business out of a
the
library?
original idea was that once you have a commercial database system that you want to jOOQ support from, you have to buy a license from jOOQ as well. So if you want to work with jOOQ in Oracle or jOOQ in SQL Server, you have to be licensed. Whereas if you're working with MySQL or Postgres or whatever, all those open source databases, you get to use the jOOQ open source edition. That was the original business plan 10 years ago, more or less. In the meantime, the commercial editions also have commercial features for power users, like computed column support or SQL transformation support for really fancy dynamic SQL, or translation between SQL dialects for those people who want to migrate off DB2 maybe towards whatever SQL Server.
Right. Okay. Okay. So sort of like for big enterprise clients with their big enterprise problems, there is a commercial version. Nice.
Exactly.
Glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. Hi, Simon. If you are in chat, say hi. This is a friendly podcast, so at any moment you can ask us things. You can ask questions if you have questions. We'd be happy to try to answer them as they come in. Right. So you said like you support like a number of the jOOQ. jOOQ supports a number of databases, including some translation between the languages. You have to be like a master of SQL, right? Like you are probably one of the few people in the world who understand it like in a very niche way, right?
Yeah, I guess so, in a very niche way. Like I could tell you about the most obscure syntaxes of the weirdest database products out there, which is quite useless for most people. But you have to know these things to make jOOQ. I guess the database vendors are also happy I'm making this, because I'm finding all the bugs of combinations of SQL features that they never thought of.
Yeah. Yes, you also find all the bugs in the Java compilers and with the
Yeah,
running
occasionally
generic
though,
implementations.
much less than in SQL engines.
Has it gone better? Like, are Java generics now stable and solid? or do you still
Oh, there are
occasionally
still
find?
edge cases. I mean, when lambdas were introduced, they had a lot of issues playing with generics
Right.
and overloading. So if you, as soon as you start combining overloading and var args and generics and lambdas and these kind of things, it gets really tricky for type inference. And then one of the big features of Java 8 wasn't lambdas themselves, but generalized target type inference, if I remember correctly, JEP 101, which drastically improved type inference for Java, which was a prerequisite for lambdas, but people didn't notice maybe the effects. But I did. A lot of things changed that didn't compile before and now compiled, or the other way around. And they should not have compiled before, but now did. And it was very funny to find that out. But in recent years, I don't think the type inference system has been touched as much as with Java 8. So it's quite stable, yes.
Yeah. Yes. That's a good question. Let's hold that thought. We have a question from Simon in the chat. Out of curiosity, what's the database you've encountered the quirkiest behavior with? What's the sort of the most?
Well, what is behavior? Is it syntax or is it runtime behavior?
Whichever you prefer.
Well, I don't know very much about transactions, for example, so I'm not going to go into that. So there are different standard transaction models, but if you look at things like Yugabyte, which are very weird in a weird distributed way, you have weird side effects that I usually don't analyze them. So they are the distributed ones are very quirky in terms of I have absolutely no idea why a query doesn't work and suddenly it works again, because maybe some cluster has to synchronize internally before you can run the next query. So I usually just add a sleep in the integration tests, because that's not a jOOQ problem. But in terms of syntax, I can tell you a lot more. But let me think about what is the quirkiest one. So one of the really weird ones, in my opinion, is DB2, for instance. DB2 is one of the older ones and very powerful ones, and it has tons of syntax, and a lot of stuff simply doesn't work. This is really, really very, very weird. So they added JSON support, and I got to crash the database instance with weird syntax, and it didn't recover, so I had to restart it, which is rare for a database of this kind. So you would expect this from some very small open source database product that is maintained by a few people, but DB2 was, I mean, I'm really surprised their JSON implementation is so weird and quirky, and I have to write tons of workarounds in jOOQ to get any JSON out of DB2. Other than that, I mean, there are a lot of historic database products, like MySQL has cleaned up a ton of stuff. It used to be really quirky, like stuff that just doesn't make sense in a strict SQL sense. When you're used to Oracle or Postgres or whatever else, in MySQL you could run stuff that clearly shouldn't be runnable, and they cleaned that up quite nicely in the past few years, in the past decade, with their strict mode, which I recommend everyone enable a new project. So if you run your new projects on MySQL, enable the strict mode, make sure it's enabled, and then you have quite standard SQL even on MySQL. So they've been investing a lot of work in there. There are different types of quirky, of course. There's also the quirky type where H2 used to be a very popular test database, which is kind of obsolete now with Testcontainers, I would say. But people used to simulate the production database on H2 or even emulate it, and it was quite powerful actually. So it worked quite well. But occasionally, the latest maintainer there, he just wanted to do everything standards compliant, which is great. So for me, it's a great database now with a ton of standard features like window functions, recursive SQL, and stuff like that. But he didn't care too much about backwards compatibility, which was really surprising to me. He kicked out a lot of weird features from the past that were probably used by a lot of people, and now they had no replacement, no direct replacement. Which isn't a problem for jOOQ, but I guess for users, this was a no-go. So if anyone ever used H2 as a production database, which is rare, it's mostly used as a test database, but as a production database, they were in for trouble after H2 version 2. And if they used it for a test database, it's probably not that severe. But I guess again, this case is now obsolete. So
Yeah, it's very interesting. The last I've heard of H2 is that somebody complained to me that their latest Spring boot application upgrade uh, brought some new H2 versions, and then
Yeah, that was the one. Yeah,
everything sort of broke
yeah,
in an unpredictable ways for some reason. I didn't look into details, so I don't
yeah. I
want to
can tell
actually.
you, the maintainer decided he wanted to make all the standard SQL keywords actual keywords. So I don't know if you know the details about H2, but H2 has a handwritten recursive descent parser, which is great. It's very funny. There's no parser generator, which means in the end they can parse any weird syntax they want, which the original maintainer actually did. So the original maintainer introduced tons of syntax like trailing commas in lists, stuff like that, which he found nice, and it's kind of weird syntax in the end. And well, the current maintainer, he's just removed all of that and made those keywords actual keywords, like the word value. And now if you have a column value in a table, well, that query didn't run anymore, and you had to tweak all sorts of things. So you can always quote keywords in SQL, but it's often very hard to get Hibernate or other tools to do that out of the box. I mean, out of the box, they assumed that it wasn't necessary, and now you have to tweak maybe some library that uses Hibernate or jOOQ even to do that. And it took a while to ripple through the ecosystem. Now it's all
Right.
fixed, right? But at the
Uh,
beginning, I guess the Spring Boot people didn't test that, and they just upgraded the dependency.
I don't know what times you're talking about. I'm talking about this Spring Boot 3.1 release, which
Okay,
was
that
sort
was
of
the
the
previous
latest.
one.
So
That
I
happened
like
again.
stuff breaks just out of the box. So I support the notion that you say that maybe testing with the real database that you're going to use in production is
Yeah.
the right thing.
Since I've discovered you folks, I mean, since I've discovered test containers, I'm recommending it to everyone, right? So it's much better than adding. I mean, with jOOQ, you can still have H2 and MySQL in your system and kind of decently run queries on both, but you still have to design your database schema for both products, and even that, there's subtle differences here and there and everywhere. So if you can remove this from your equations, it's going to be much simpler.
Right. This is interesting. What following up on this, right? So there are a number of different databases, and you answer it, which is the Quirkiest. What's your favorite database, or maybe if not your favorite, like in your sort of in your ecosystem, in the jOOQ ecosystem, what are the more popular databases? Maybe a couple that you get the most users coming from.
Well, it's quite biased, your second part, because since jOOQ's business model is based on the underlying database system, obviously there are a lot less jOOQ users with Oracle and SQL Server, for instance, than there should be, because they all have to pay to use jOOQ. So they're fewer than the open source editions users, just by definition of the business model.
Right.
I would say it would probably reflect the usual popularity charts from DB engines, for example. I'm sure you're aware of it. I would say MySQL, Postgres are very popular in the jOOQ ecosystem. I think Postgres is overly popular, more than overall, because it fits very nicely. So Postgres has a ton of features that jOOQ supports very well, like stored functions, table valued functions, and user defined types, enums, and what do you want. And Postgres users get a lot out of jOOQ.
Right.
So it's probably biased towards using jOOQ as compared to direct JDBC or MyBaptist or something like that, which is also SQL based but not as type safe.
Right. Let me quickly show you maybe a thing on my screen. So this is the results of the Stack Overflow survey, which is I think came out
Yeah.
maybe very recently, maybe even today. So and if we select the professional developers who work and get paid for this, rather than just all developers, part of whom are students and so on, then the top rankings of the most popular databases are like the following: the Postgres, MySQL, SQLite, and then the rest, Microsoft SQL Server. Uh, Mongo, Redis, Maria,
Yeah.
Elasticsearch, and others, including like the Firestore and Firebase and BigQuery at very decent numbers. Like if this is the 5% of the ecosystem, I would expect it to be like lower, to be honest.
Yeah, I
No.
would also think so. I don't think this reflects reality very well. I mean, if you can show DB engines as a comparative tool, I guess there's just some sort of correlation between people using Postgres and people using Stack Overflow directly, right? So this is about the questions are asked on the system. And I know for a fact, for instance, in Oracle, when you're using Oracle and when you have Oracle support, people, those people hang out in Oracle forums a lot. Oracle has a ton of great forums, and they have a ton of great community managers who are very helpful on tons of channels, including Twitter and Reddit and what you have. And maybe they're just not on Stack Overflow as often as Postgres users, which there's no vendor for Postgres, right? So you can't ask the vendor any questions. So
Yeah.
they probably have to go to Stack Overflow, right?
Yeah,
So they
probably.
have to ask the community, and with Oracle, you get a lot of support from the vendor. So it's not realistic, I think.
Right. Right. So this is the DB engines ranking.
Yes.
And you can see that Oracle, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres, Mongo. Surprisingly, actually, pretty much, I think all of them would be popular. One interesting addition here is that I see is Snowflake, for
Yeah,
example.
Snowflake is picking up a lot of momentum. It was one of the most popular feature requests in jOOQ to add Snowflake support some years ago, and jOOQ now supports it.
Can you
It's
talk a little bit about Snowflake, what it is?
well, I'm not sure exactly what the distinction between Snowflake and Redshift and BigQuery is in terms of performance and the cost model and these kind of things, but it's one of those number crunching database products, which are mostly used for OLAP use cases. So you don't store your transactional data in Snowflake, but you analyze it. So you have some database somewhere else, and then you dump all the data into Snowflake or Redshift or whatever, and then you have a huge machine that can just run tons of queries and tons of data in a relatively short time for a relatively big amount of money, I
Right.
guess. I'm not sure how much it
But
costs, but
is it like this is a cloud
yeah.
solution, right? It's not you cannot have a local Snowflake.
No, you can't.
Okay, good, nice. Do you feel do you feel in general that like the cloud databases, the managed solutions, eat a little bit into or like don't not what you think, but do you feel the impact of the cloud databases eat into the users of jOOQ to the point where you need to think about supporting some of them?
Yeah,
Or
definitely. I mean, all of those cloud databases are for number crunching, which means SQL is very important and ORMs are less important. So I don't see the point of using an ORM for a database like Snowflake. Obviously, sometimes you have to store some data in a transactional way, even in Snowflake, but you're probably mostly running huge queries and complicated queries, analytics and whatever, and you need dynamic SQL where jOOQ shines. So I would say there's a slight bias of jOOQ towards these cloud-based databases, which are made for this purpose. Now, obviously, you can also run Postgres in the cloud, and you can also do some number crunching in Postgres or whatever database that is a more general purpose database. So, but I think given the popularity of the feature request at the time of support for Snowflake, it really shows that people who want to support these kind of cloud databases really want something like jOOQ in
right.
general, if they know that it exists, of course.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very natural. So, like jOOQ gives you this comfort as a developer. I spend my time in my IDE, right? I
Mm-hmm.
know what I'm doing when I'm dealing with my programming language of choice, right? I know that my IDE has my support, like supports me every step of the way, right? I can write things. I can use content assist. It's all very natural. So having jOOQ kind of sort of mimic what I could be doing with the raw database support, right? But like with the tools that I love and trust, I think this is a very natural step for developers to ask for that.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from Mark. Do you see Flink style push streamed queries coming natively to relational databases, which seems like a very natural evolution?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is a SQL standard document for these kinds of query languages in the works. I'm not sure if it already has a number, but I know there's a committee trying to standardize on stream queries, which thinks about the use cases that are common to a Kafka and whatever. I'm not very sure who the players are at the current time apart from Kafka, but it definitely makes sense to also apply the inversion of direction. I mean, normally SQL is a pull model, like imperative programming as well. So you run a query, you wait, and you get the results. But why not push a query and then wait for the results to stream back to your application? I had a lot of success before I made jOOQ at a previous employer with Oracle AQ, which is not as fancy as actual stream queries, but you could send messages through AQ from an Oracle database back into an application, and those messages could be typed. So, but behind the scenes, Oracle ran a select for update skip locked query, which just helped skipping messages that were already sent to some other process. So it was all transactional and everything. So very, very convenient programming model for certain cases. It's a niche, obviously, so it's not going to be a huge thing, but as I quoted on the blog a long time ago, Michael Stonebreaker, who did tons of innovation for RDMS for the past 50 years, these new technologies are teaching the old elephants new tricks. So that's what he said. I don't recall what conference, but the old elephants, they're not going to go away. They're going to learn all these new tricks, and they're going to integrate it into the SQL standard, as we've shown many years in the past. So SQL has integrated object-oriented features. SQL has integrated XML features. SQL has integrated JSON right now. The latest standard has integrated graphs, which is very exciting. So I'm going to be studying that more in depth in the next years. What that means. So I know for a fact that also, for instance, Neo4j engineers have been involved with contributing their Cypher query language to the SQL standard in some aspects. So the standard now combines the relational parts with the graph parts in a way that eventually maybe implementations can compete only on execution and not on the syntax, which is the idea behind the standard.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely. I mean, streams also make sense. It's going to be more work, I think, than the others, because you really have to, it really affects the entire query definition and how you think about querying. But I'm sure they're going to figure out some really nice way.
Yeah.
So if
Well,
there's going to be something in the standard eventually, then jOOQ might support it even.
okay. Do you support like experimental features, or do
Of
you try to be?
databases,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
usually no. I mean, there's so many proven features that jOOQ still wants to look into that. I mean, experimental stuff. Like I've made this mistake of getting into the hype of DuckDB support, which is a really fun new product that competes with SQLite in a way. So it's also for analytics more than SQLite, which is more for OLTP. But DuckDB still isn't very stable. So I started too early, so I ran into tons of bugs and also regressions, which is very annoying. So regressions is really annoying for a library developer. So when they change stuff that I based assumption on, and it works, and now it doesn't work anymore, and it's not my fault. I don't like that very much. So with experimental stuff, I mean, they're versioned 0.7. It's my own fault, right? So it's just a hugely hyped database product that is not GA yet. So it's my fault to actually support it already.
No, but it makes sense. It's just it's a trade-off between
sense, yeah.
it's a trade-off between how early adopter you want yourself and the jOOQ library to be, versus the speed of development and the amount of changes and regressions that development team introduces on the database level. So
But I mean, I want to tell you that, for instance, there are also stable features that are new, like, for instance, in Oracle 23, which is now published as a developer preview, but it's kind of production ready already. You just can't buy it yet, but you can test it already. And they've implemented a new feature where they call it JSON relational duality, where you can map your relational model onto JSON documents and vice versa. And it feels like GraphQL, but done right. I've tried to integrate GraphQL into jOOQ, and I've always found GraphQL a terrible abstraction. So the syntax is just terrible, and it just doesn't feel right. To me, it feels like they have great ideas, but they did it wrong. And this JSON relational duality, I'm hoping it will make it into the SQL standard, because it's really, you have a relational database with many-to-many relationships, and you can materialize those relationships in any sort of tree structure that looks like a JSON document, but behind the scenes, it's stored as a relational model, and you can update it, you can delete stuff from it, and you feel like you're working with something like MongoDB, but it's relational with all the benefits of being actually relational. And I think this is going to be a feature in one of the next versions of jOOQ that I want to invest much more time on these kind of things than some weird experimental stuff by a lot of database products. So I think this is going to be the future for many other products as well. They will copy this from Oracle.
Right. No, but it's also clear Oracle has been a leader in databases for a while, and it's it's probably going to continue to be so for a while as well.
Yeah,
I
think so.
So new features. There is natural sort of competition between using jOOQ libraries and using other ways to use databases, like various like JPA, Hibernate approaches. Do you see them picking up new features equally fast, or do you think jOOQ has some sort of advantage?
Well, I mean, the question is, what is the focus of a library or an approach? First off, right? So I mean, JPA is an object graph persistence abstraction, which does this very well. So if you have object graph persistence problems, then you're probably not even going to look at jOOQ. Just like the other way around, if you have really complex dynamic SQL problems, you're probably not going to look at JPA. I mean, you can get somewhere with JPA. Obviously, they have dynamic SQL APIs just as much as jOOQ has some sort of abstraction over CRUD, right? So you don't have to run insert statements. You can have an updatable record in jOOQ, which is a record abstraction generated by the code generator, and you can call insert on it, and it does the right thing. But it's not an ORM in the sense that you have object graph persistence where you have tons of entities that are related, and you flush them all in one flush call. So it's just a different focus. So I think between jOOQ and JPA, the competition isn't that big, in the sense that a lot of people are using both. So it makes sense to use both in the same product. If you have some aspects of your application which are very transactional, very object graph persistency, you're going to use JPA there, for instance, to insert data, to write data, and when you have to read the data back into your application, maybe you're using jOOQ there, because jOOQ has a lot of mapping features that JPA doesn't offer you in that same amount of convenience, like type safety, for instance, or nested collection mappings, multiset application, the operator. So I think these two don't compete. There are competitors, of course. jOOQ always competes with JDBC directly. So a lot of applications still exist out there who use just JDBC. Why not? I mean, if you have only static SQL in your application, like some simple queries that you can write them as strings now with Java 16, I think. Or when was it? Text blocks 15 or 16? It got a lot easier, right? So you can just copy paste it into your application. IntelliJ, while you write the SQL, will kind of type check your SQL statement, at least while you write it. So once your schema changes, you still don't have the benefits of jOOQ, of compilation errors. But I used to do it this way a very long time ago, and I can see how people just want to copy paste from their SQL editor into the Java application and be done with it. And JDBC is good enough, right, for those cases. or
Right.
maybe they're using some thin wrapper on top of JDBC, like JDBI or Spring JDBC template, just to use lambdas based on JDBC. So that's fine as well. So jOOQ typically competes with that as much more than with JPA, I'd say.
I see. I see.
Although
Uh,
you can use static SQL also with jOOQ, of course. I mean, jOOQ doesn't force you to use the DSL. You can just pop in any SQL string in jOOQ, and jOOQ will still help you fetch the data much more simply than with JDBC directly.
right. Okay. Okay. Do you have a, maybe we've talked enough about this. Do you have maybe an example to show and give our viewers a taste what jOOQ is?
Yeah, let me try that. So I'm lucky I prepared this. So let me see if I can
Because
share.
if you don't have an example, I do have an example, and we can go through this together.
No, I do have one.
Okay.
And I can share. Let me see my IntelliJ. So can you see it? Is it good enough?
Yes, of course. It's uh, maybe you can zoom it in a little bit or enter the presentation mode.
Yeah, let me see the presentation mode. Can you help me?
It's view appearance, second line,
Appearance.
and then
Yeah, there you
enter
go.
presentation mode.
Perfect. I guess that's it.
I think you need to reshare your screen somehow,
Really?
or minimize the window so it disappeared.
It disappeared? How do I
Yeah.
minimize the presentation screen?
You go mouse all the way up, and then you just click the green. Are you on a Mac?
No, Windows. So you can
Well,
see it
just
now?
no. Can you go back to StreamYard and share your screen again?
Yeah, I'll do that. I just shared the window. Maybe the window name has changed. Is it good now?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Perfect.
I can see it, and then that means that people can see it as well.
Perfect.
All right.
So here we are. I have the Sakila database, which is an open source database originally created by MySQL. You have tables like actors and films. So here's an actor table. This is generated code that you can see here. This code was reverse engineered from the database that code generator was directed to. And in the actor table, you can see you have actor ID, and you have to type information on the actor ID, type information on the first name. And with this information, you can just write any query you want. So for instance, here I wrote select actor first name, last name, and as you can see, I can autocomplete. Help me with the columns that are available from this table, and it's all type safe. So if you write last update, I expected the records of 2 strings. You're not always going to denominate this type. You're usually going to use var here, but if you're going to use a string type, you can see that the type safety will fail this query. So whenever you change your database schema, you regenerate the code, and your query is no longer compiled, which is one of the key features of jOOQ. The other
Right.
feature was also auto completion again, so actor last name, so you see everything that is available here.
So
Yeah.
the database schema is the single source of truth,
Yes.
and your Java classes are generated from a real instance of the database.
Yeah. Well, a real instance in this case, I actually used Testcontainers, of course. So I'm using Flyway right now to migrate the usual migration scripts into a Testcontainers database. Where is it? Oh, shame on me! I didn't do it in this case.
right.
Yeah, usually I do it. Maybe I didn't upgrade it yet. Wait a second.
I have
I must be in the wrong
I have
folder.
an example about that
Yeah.
because we prepared recently at Atomic Jar. We created a guide for working with jOOQ, Flyway, and
Yeah,
test
you
containers.
did. But I
Uh,
did as well, actually. I did. I was in the wrong Maven file.
okay.
So here we actually run test containers. So I'm still hoping that eventually there will be a better Maven plugin, but I'm using the Groovy Maven plugin here to run a test containers container for Postgres. And I do that at the beginning of the build. And then at the end of the build, I stop this again. And in between, I run the Flyway migration and the jOOQ code generation. So the thing you're going to show is going to be the same thing, but just in a single plugin. So it's going to be much more convenient than what I've just shown. But the concept is the same. So behind the scenes, this whole thing runs a test containers instance. Then it installs everything from the Sakila schema using Flyway or Liquibase or whatever you want to use into this database, and it reverse engineers the actual Postgres database for jOOQ code. So it's pretty much what you are going to show as well, I think.
Yeah, a little bit. So this is a very interesting use case of test containers libraries, sort of the build time containers, which of course from the API point of view, there is no difference whether you use test containers API during your build, which is a Java program, or during your like just executing a Java process or running tests.
Absolutely.
It can spin up containers in any case.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then you have this DSL which helps you to write the SQL by writing Java, and you have the knowledge about the schema, which gives you no chance to go less chance to go wrong with various data types, and also the actual SQL dialect, because there are only particular methods available at the particular places of the thing.
Exactly. So you can't just go here and write from again, right? So after the where clause, there's no from clause anymore. So it doesn't compile.
Was it easy to implement this, or was it like the what was the hardest part of jOOQ?
Well, there's a lot of really fancy features which were really hard. So I'm going to show the multiset feature, which is probably jOOQ's most powerful feature. We can see where the example is. Multiset. Here we go. So I think this is really where everyone else will copy stuff from jOOQ eventually. So here's I'm just going to show this query here. So we have I'm not used to using IntelliJ. This is very much of a distraction. So here we go. We have this target data structure, right? So we have a couple of Java 16 records. Like the name is a first and last name tuple. The actor is just a name for now. The category is just a string for now. And a film is a title, a list of actors, and a list of categories. So we have too many relationships that we're nesting in one go, right? So we want to have a query that selects from film. Here it is. We order by title. We take the first films, right, with a limit clause. And in the end, we're mapping all of this into the film constructor, right? But the film projection here, it doesn't just project the film title. It projects also these multisets. So what is a multiset? It's a standard SQL operator that exists in standard SQL, and a few databases, for instance, Oracle and Informix have implemented it, but it is emulated behind the scenes for most other dialects. Like in Postgres, which we're using here, it's going to be emulated using JSON. So using JSON, we're going to nest this subquery here, this correlated subquery, which fetches all the actors for a film. And here we have another correlated subquery, which fetches all the categories per film. And this is really a big pain in a lot of ORMs and other SQL libraries when you want to nest stuff. So usually ORMs can nest one nested collection, but as soon as you have two nested collections, it gets really hairy and you have to do plumbing yourself. Whereas in jOOQ, you can just write this single query, and I'm going to run it now. I'm hoping you're going to see the output. So I'm going to make this bigger. You see Testcontainers spinning up. Testcontainers is loading and then migrating all those Sakila stuff into the Testcontainers database. You see it here with Flyway. And then in the end, this is the query that's going to be executed. So jOOQ prints by default debug query rendition. And you see how the nested query generates stuff with JSON here. So you see this is the film actor correlated subquery. You can see it, and it nests stuff into a JSON array, and the JSON array, in order to serialize the nested data in the most optimal way. And you can see the result is also printed here in the debug output. You can see the film title, and you see a list of actors. So the two-string rendition of the result will give you this list of actor. I've also printed it here. So the film Academy Dinosaur has categories. So only one category in this list, but several actors. And you can very easily write these queries, and they're all type safe. So I'm going to show you the type safety here. So if ever I decide to move this film title column here, for instance, it will no longer compile. You see here now a compilation error because this structure here does not correspond to this constructor. So I will have to fix it like this, right? So I can fix it. And if I move the same attribute to the same position as well. It even works this way if I change something from the nested query, like for instance, the actor also has last update. And if I do this, nothing here compiles anymore. So I can't map this first name last update tuple into a string tuple because it's just wrong, right? So I'm expecting 2 strings. So this mapping here has to receive 2 strings. And if I'm not mapping this into a name, then I can't map it into the actor either, etc. So everything is type safe on any level of nesting. So you can nest this 10 levels deep, as in jOOQ's integration test, which you're probably not going to do, but it's not, there's no limit to the number of nestings you want to do in both in SQL, in jOOQ, and in the solution. So this was really hard to do, since that was the original question. It was really hard to do, to implement correctly for all the databases that support either JSON or XML or Multiset natively.
This is pretty amazing on 2 levels. First, I feel like I understand your explanation, but I know for a fact that if I would need to repeat it to somebody like tomorrow, I would completely fumble.
Yeah, now you have the video recording.
It makes sense, and I intuitively feel like I understand it, but probably it flew over my head. But what I like here very, very much is that it does what I wanted to do as a developer.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. Giving me the type safety, giving me a very easy facility to map things at any level and do those many-to-many relationships very, very easily. So that is super, super cool. The fact that I don't need to think about how it's implemented in particular databases, that is just a cherry on top, right? Because
absolutely,
I don't need to reinvent this for my Postgres, right, or for my some other databases, which is
in particular because it's using SQL JSON, which is really it's very nicely standardized by Oracle, but the implementations differ so much, and they have tons of bugs which jOOQ works around.
Right. Nice. We have a couple of questions, which maybe we can try to look at. Before we go into that, can I show a thing on our side? Because you mentioned that you mentioned the plugin for Maven that we did, and I will just take over very, very, very briefly to show that as well. And maybe you can comment on whether that is exactly what you had in mind. So we recently published a guide for working with jOOQ and Flyway using test containers, which the guide that goes through a Spring Boot application with jOOQ support and enabling the combination of Flyway, test containers, and generating the jOOQ code from the schema and from the Flyway generated schema using a Maven plugin, which is an open source plugin that what we recently published on GitHub, which you can go check and look. And it looks very, very much similar to what you showed, except it's a little bit more declarative in the Maven way, right? So we just say we would like to generate sources. We would like to use the container image with test containers, and we configure jOOQ to have the schema and everything. And it works the same way as your example where you generate and run the test container using a Groovy script, but in a declarative Maven way.
It's much cleaner.
Yeah, especially if you use Maven. There is a question from Steve. Do you have any Gradle-based examples for jOOQ, Flyway, and Gradle?
Well, I don't yet. I know Gradle is a big issue with jOOQ. There's a third-party plugin by ATN Studer for code generation in Gradle, which is very good. ATN works for Gradle, actually. So they're using it internally at Gradle, I think, because they're also using jOOQ for some things. But it doesn't combine test containers and Flyway. So I'm not sure how to do that yet because I'm not very much an expert on Gradle at all.
Right.
Maybe you folks will do a plugin as well. Oleg, do you know?
Yeah, it could be an interesting exercise if you are in the community and you're using Gradle and jOOQ, you probably should be using test containers as well.
Yes.
And then if you use all those three, then you might be interested in contributing a plugin for Gradle as well. We got Sergey here as well, saying hi, Lucas. Excited to have you on the stream. Hi, Sergey.
Hi there.
Nice to have you with us as well. Right. So I don't think currently we have the particular plan to make the Gradle plugin ourselves. And also Gradle is a little bit more flexible.
Yeah.
So I think it's much easier to use Testcontainers libraries directly from a Gradle build, even though that might not be the recommended way. Yeah, but it's definitely easier than in the Maven build.
Hmm.
So hopefully
Well,
that helps.
I mean, to Steve, you could ask Etienne Studer to maybe add this feature to his plugin. Maybe he's open to the idea. It makes
Yeah.
sense to offer
Could
this out of the box. I
yes.
never wanted to do it myself because, I mean, you see, there's a lot of dependencies that need to be updated, and a lot of guides and a lot of documentation to be written that is always out of date. Especially with Flyway, they moved so fast in the last couple of years, and broke stuff, Liquibase as well. So I would always regret making examples, which keeps me from making more jOOQ stuff, right? So if someone else makes an example or an integration like you did now with test containers, or I'm still hoping that Spring Boot would solve some of these problems of integrating these tools in a better way. But that's one of the reasons why I'm not doing this, especially for Gradle myself.
Right. Makes sense. If we feel that it belongs in the Gradle under the Gradle like umbrella, then perhaps there could be like a GitHub issue or something, and we
Yeah,
can
sure.
thumbs up it until eventually it's gonna pop up to the top of the list, and somebody will have to implement it. But it's not that much of a code, so it could be a community contribution as well. Right. We have a couple more questions which accumulated from a little bit of time ago. So here's one from Simon. I just didn't want to ask it earlier, not to derail the conversation. Which approach would you recommend for auditing akin to Hibernate Envers? And
Yeah, I'll have to check it out what Envers can do. I will have to check out the Stack Overflow answer because it's probably outdated because jOOQ now has audit column support. It's a commercial jOOQ feature, so you can declare which columns are your audit columns. The typical ones that most applications have are the user that creates something or modifies something, and the date that something was created or modified. And there will be more of these kinds of features in the near future. They're all based on the virtual, the client-side computed column feature. So I'm not sure if you folks, if you users have seen that one, but I'll briefly explain. Client-side computed columns are computed columns like on the server side. Some database products have this, where you can say, okay, this column always depends on these two other columns, like sums up these two things or calculates some whatever. Maybe includes the VAT if it's static. You can use a computed column to always calculate something and store it with the table. It feels like a view. And jOOQ now has this on the client side as well. So you have in jOOQ's code generator, a computed column. And to you in client code, it looks like an actual column with stored data, but it's calculated by jOOQ itself behind the scenes. So every time you run a query, it either calculates it when it inserts or updates data. So that will be a stored computed column, or it calculates it when you read the data. That will be a virtual computed column, just like on the server side. And the server doesn't actually know anything about this. So the server, like for instance, Postgres doesn't know that jOOQ has labeled this as a computed column. But you can do it, and you will never forget calculating your audit value anymore. So for instance, if you need anything else other than just user and timestamp, you can generate arbitrary values, and every time you store the data with arbitrary statements, even the merge statement, it will update the information.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And Simon comments that they are currently using Enverse with the Wiz modifier and are interested in checking out how it works with jOOQ. So yeah, I think this would be a very, very good follow-up. Simon, if you do try it with jOOQ and see how it works, ping Lukas maybe on social network,
Yeah,
or
sure.
write a short article report or a guest or something. It would be very, very interesting to see what are the results and how it works.
I'll try to find that Stack Overflow answer and edit my answer.
Yeah, that is a little bit with Stack Overflow, right? Like the answers deteriorate very, very rapidly over
Yeah,
the
I
few
usually
years.
edit them. I forgot about the audit feature.
Yes, yes. Right. So I have a small last question about, well, specifically about test containers, right? So I know that you use test containers very, very much, and because you need to support all the databases, so it just makes sense to automate their lifecycle and creation using test containers. What's your sort of what's your favorite use case? Do you have any other use cases for test containers that you kind of sort of like?
So far, no. I thought about using it as an actual database thing instead of Docker directly. So I'm installing most databases into Docker and then run them to develop jOOQ. I thought about using test containers for this, but I didn't see the use case behind it in the end yet to do it. But it's very convenient to just install and throw away stuff. When you test stuff, when you develop stuff, even when you develop jOOQ itself, jOOQ also has a schema, which is the jOOQ integration test schema, which I install on all of these 30 plus database products. So I've started using this whole process where I use test containers to install the schema and then generate jOOQ code, which is the integration test for the jOOQ code generator. So I'm using test containers for these kind of things. So the same stuff that I'm recommending users should use. And obviously the integration tests themselves, where jOOQ is integration tested, are now running on test containers where it makes sense. So on some database products, it doesn't make sense yet because of some technical reason. Like again, Yugabyte. I often run into issues where it has some synchronization problems in the cluster, which takes time to analyze. So I just didn't automate that as much yet. But for instance, MySQL and Postgres, Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, all of these tests run on test containers because it's just so simple to start a container, a fresh database. You can initialize it. It's not like production, right? It's a beautiful world where you don't have to maintain anything. You don't have to maintain your data. You don't have to make backups or anything. So you can just install everything in there. It's fresh. It's exactly as you expect. And then once the tests are done, you just throw it away.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the basic use case of test containers. Nothing surprising here.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Obviously it's a classic use case, combining containers and tests, thus leading to the name. But you also mentioned that you some time ago you created the issue reproducer.
Oh yeah.
Which
Right.
which simplified your life very much. Can you maybe share a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
So should I share the screen? You mean?
You can, if you can show it, that'd be perfect, because I didn't see that before. I know that you said that you were using it a little bit.
Well, yeah, I didn't prepare it. Anyway, I'll just explain it. So it's called a minimal complete viable example, which is maybe you can show it. You have your browsers already on share, the jOOQ MCVE project. And I recommend in every issue template, when someone creates an issue with jOOQ, that if it's a complicated thing to reproduce, they just take this template, tweak it a little bit. So the template will spin up a test containers instance of Postgres currently, but I'm going to add also Oracle, SQL Server, and others. But currently it's only Postgres, and it will spin it up, and then it has a sample database that is installed, and then code generation runs exactly what I've shown before, right? So the same process. I'm actually going to try migrating towards your plugin instead of doing the Groovy thing. So make people aware more of what you did with your own plugin, which also supports Liquibase by now, I think, or is it not published yet?
Liquid
Yours?
base, I think, could be an upcoming feature.
Okay, I saw the issue and someone's working on it, but I'm not sure if it's published yet. So that's it. Yes. So you just clone this. You can create a pull request or whatever. You can push it to your own clone. Whatever your change is gonna help me analyze the bug, and it's very simple to see the bug because I can just run Maven verify on your version of this project, and I will immediately see the bug, right? Exactly
Right.
as you had it on your machine. So this is really something that I think not just test containers, just containerization helps maybe in the future to developers to create a minimum viable complete example, minimal complete
Right.
viable example, which the name is stolen from Stack Overflow because all the Stack Overflow moderators will tell you to actually do this. But it's very hard on Stack Overflow because you have to think through all the steps of minimizing the example, making it verifiable, making it complete, right? So on Stack Overflow, it's very hard to find this minimal thing. But here, you just know, okay, it has to do with maybe with store procedures. So you add a store procedure to the SQL script, you install it in Postgres, you run the code generator, you run a query on it, and then it's very simple to reproduce the problem.
Yeah.
And with test containers, it's just all you need as a user is Docker, I think, and then you're pretty much set.
Yeah. Yeah. This is very cool. This is because uh we've recently started seeing more and more frameworks adding support, and thus users getting support from for the sort of the clone and run experience, where the frameworks will by default enable test containers and enable the run mode where you run your application normally, but they will create the environment for your application, necessary environment, using the test containers API calls. So if your application needs a database, the application framework provisions it for you using test containers, and similarly for like message brokers and so on. And this clone and run pre-packaged setup, we see lots of good feedback about this and growing in popularity. And I think this minimal complete verifiable
Yeah, it's
example is
terrible
a
name.
is a it's okay. It's
MCVE.
MCVE. Uh, yeah, it's embodies that philosophy very, very well, where the whole setup is pre-configured for you, and you
Yeah,
just need to add your business logic. And in this case, just showing the issue, and then there is no need to submit an issue with a
right.
description of what goes wrong, where you can actually submit an actual simple integration test that shows what were the expected results, what were the actual results, and where it goes wrong. The, the name the name reminds me of CVE, which is the vulnerability thing,
Yeah, right.
but
I didn't think of it.
this is like it's 1,000 CVEs, right? It's M is the Roman for thousand, right? It's
1,000. Yeah,
and
yeah.
and
And the
MCVE.
105 and E is wrong.
Right. No, but like what I'm trying to say, it's a great example. I'm very, very happy that we got time to look at that.
Absolutely.
And I think even Sergey is saying that we probably should do something for test containers, maybe
I think
issues as
every
well.
library that depends on stuff that needs to be integration tested should have one of these templates, right? So,
Yes.
and as Sergey says, is it us or you? This has helped me so many times prevent bug reports because users they usually try to describe it and it's not reproducible. I don't even know what it was about because it's so complicated, and they try to create this minimal reproducer. And while they try to do this, that it helped them start thinking logically about what could be the problem. And they always found, and not always, of course, but they often found the problem was their own code.
Yeah.
While they were minimizing the reproducer, and this minimal thing is really important because they tried to find the minimal example that reproduces the problem, and they saw, okay, it's my bad. It's not
Yeah.
actually the library. I'm doing something wrong. It helps structure your thoughts, I think.
It does. And very often, we as individual developers who write code are very more often at fault than library developers, or I don't know, compiler developers or database developers who have the products which like literally thousands of people use without issues. And it's very common and very simple to think that everyone else is at fault, right? It's just like my code works or it's supposed to work, but that's not very often the case. And projects like this minimal complete example is, I think, can help many open source and in-house projects to simplify the support.
Yeah, not just that. I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate is it also removes all things like Spring Boot and stuff. It's because usually Spring Boot is not the problem, or if it's the problem, then it's not a jOOQ problem, right? So people try to explain, I have this setup and they use Spring Boot and they have 50 libraries on Spring Boot, and how are you going to minimize this, right? So if they're going to start sending reproducers that have Spring Boot in them, I'm gonna cry. And with this, they can start with nothing, right? So even Flyway, I just added it for kicks, but it's not important here. The important thing is just jOOQ and code generation, and then maybe Scala, Kotlin, and Java. And then they can start trying to add things until they reach the moment where they have the bug, not remove things. So they start adding things, and it's much faster to find any bug.
No, it's great.
So yeah,
it's great.
You'll do this as well, huh?
What? Sorry?
You'll do this as well, huh? So that's great.
Well, no promises, but it's an interesting feature. We would love to consider putting it on our backlog. See how polite I phrased that we might not do it. No, but personally, I think it's a great feature, and I think we should think about how to do this. Maybe even for the polyglot environment, which is because there are Testcontainers libraries available in other languages than Java. So there is Go, .NET, and others. Maybe we can have a common setup that unifies issue reporting or like feature exploration for all the languages. Maybe not, but we definitely would think about this. Right. We are at time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for your insight on all the topics, SQL, databases. Thank you for showing jOOQ. Thank you for creating jOOQ. Like that's, I think this is a non-trivial contribution that community should be grateful for. And I'm personally very happy to see you in good spirits. And that is a wrap. I don't think we have any more questions. So this is it.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Thank you, Simon, for watching us. And everyone, let's fight bugs together. Thank you, Sergey, for joining us as well. Right. Thank you very much. This session is available on YouTube. If you are watching it later, share it with a colleague. Let them enjoy Lukas's insight and wisdom as well. And then subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you at the next episode somewhere in the near future. Thanks so much. Bye.